Evening, everyone. I have a bit of a presentation here tonight, if you can bear with us on that. There's quite a few scriptures in there, but I do have them written up here, so if you want to follow along in your Bible, then that's fine. But otherwise, you can just follow with what we've got here. So I've got sort of posing the question here is, what do you see? And, we all probably see different things at different stages of our life. And to give you an idea, I grew up in the Adelaide Hills in a place called Uradla, and you're probably familiar with the Piccadilly Valley, and the Piccadilly Valley is sort of around where I was. And when I go back and visit that place, it's an absolutely beautiful place. If you've been up there and you see how the sun comes across all the land and that's there. In my day, it was all full of cabbages and cauliflowers and all sorts of planted material, but we don't see that so much anymore. But that was my whole world at that time, and so really all I could see was the area round about me and where I went to school, and not much further than that. Sometimes when you go on a holiday and you might go to an exotic place and you see all sorts of things and you're taking pictures left, right and centre, and then when you come home you find that all the pictures you've taken they seem to be pretty similar. What seemed spectacular at that time doesn't seem so spectacular day after day after day. And I had someone who'd gone on that Alaska Sky train where you can see all through the roof of the train, and I seen his photos and I said, wow, that's terrific, terrific, terrific. And then he said, yeah, but after you've seen that 1,000 times, it sort of mellows off and it's not so spectacular anymore. So really over a period of time, what we see changes. I then moved away from the Adelaide Hills, and you come down to Morphett Vale, and then you see different things again. But that's only in our life existence, but there's also the things we see in our school years. There's things we see in our working life. There's things that we see in our social life. There's many, many aspects of life that we start to see. And usually what happens as we get older is that we see what we want to see. We have a bias from our own opinions that we've formed over a period of time, and we really see what we want to see. As we grow older, we have our own way of thinking about things, and particularly when it comes to the things of God. I was brought up in a God-conscious family, but then other things got in the way and you stopped even being a God-conscious person. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to come back. There's an idiom that says, you cannot see the forest for the trees, and that really means that the person or organisation cannot see the big picture because the focus is too much on the details. Most of us only get to see our local environment or the earth, and from that is the earth's beauty, but we never really take it in. And I'm one of those. I was surrounded by forests and vegetation and animals and all sorts of things, but never ever really appreciated it. There's a little quote I've got here that vision is the power to see. And we need to make sure that we are looking in the right directions, that we're looking for the right visions. Go to our next. Oh, didn't go, David. Is he there? Still not going. Do you want to go next for me then? Just while I was trying to get up that next slide. I've got a few pictures here if we can get through some of them. And really the background of all these pictures is to do with space. And some of the people that have been in my area have seen some of these slides, but in actual fact, a lot of the content is different to that. And so the space is really, like for us, I could see things that are on this earth, I can see things that are out here today, and so I'm looking from here, looking out. But can we really see anything from looking in? And so from space, is really when someone looked back and they seen our earth. They seen it from a different perspective to what we can see. And here we can see, and it's got up there, it's the lunar module descending to ocean storms in November 1969, and we see a glimpse of the surface of the moon and the lunar module. And I've also put up there about the American dollar bill, the reverse side of the American dollar bill, and you've probably seen that before. And that supposedly has what's called the eye of providence, or the all-seeing eye of God. And really that was supposed to represent, it sort of represent that God was watching over, or divine providence, the eye of God watches over humanity. And the other words that are on that dollar bill are "In God we trust." Now, there's many, many aspects that we could look into the American dollar bill and how it might feature, and has things relevant to the scripture and the ideology that those people had at the time. But we're not going to look there, but it's just in those two things. There's the all-seeing eye of God, and "In God we trust." And that "In God we trust" was required by law to appear on currency in 1955, and is still current on there. And they'd done a survey back in 2003. 90% of Americans supported the inscription "In God we trust." So that's 20 years ago. In 2019, they'd done another poll of college students, and they showed that 53% of students supported this inclusion in the currency. And I wonder where they see God in their lives now, because we are bombarded with information, with different things that want to undermine the Word of God. It's interesting, this dollar bill, it took something like, in today's currency, 257 billion American dollars to run the space program between 1960 and 1973. So that's a lot of those that you'd have to have in your pocket if you were going to pay for that. And even the budget alone for 2022 was $24 million. See where this will go for me now. There we are. The topic of the talk really is God's wonders clearly seen. And this picture here is Apollo 9 at sunrise, reflected through the Earth's atmosphere. And you know, it's a miracle really in itself that the sun rises every day at predetermined times, and it's been doing that at a precision time, and it's been doing that for many, many long years. I suppose we should mention that really the sun doesn't rise exactly, but the sun appears to rise from the horizon, because actually it's the Earth's motion that causes the sun to appear. And I don't want to appear to be disrespectful to science or the discoveries in any way, but really what I'm trying to highlight here today is that their findings, science's findings, really relate to finding out what God already had in existence. It's not that they invented anything. The Americans didn't pay someone for the sun to rise every day or for the earth to rotate. But really, when they go out and they discover, they're only really discovering what God already had in place. In Romans chapter 1, we see, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." The science world is without excuse, because they are looking for all of this stuff and trying to work out how did it come here, how did it come to being, but in actual fact it was already there. God had created it. And so they don't have an excuse. They should be really looking and saying, isn't this a marvellous thing that the Creator has made, and we want to know more about it, not keep questioning where does it come, is it the Big Bang or whatever. An interesting picture, the morning sun reflects on the Gulf of Mexico here. And if we look into the next slide, we're just going to read here what we already know. It says, in the beginning God created, and the word created is a Hebrew word, bara, and that means out of nothing into something, or to speak into existence. And in verse 2, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of the Lord moved upon the waters." And in verse 3, it says, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that light, and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness." In verse 5, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day." And the word day is a different word from creator. That's a word yom, or it means a period of time. It doesn't mean a literal 24-hour day as we might know it, but it has a different meaning. And in verse 6, and it said, "And God said, let there be firmament in the midst of the waters, let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament." And so we really see that God's creation was a marvellous thing. And these pictures here, don't know exactly where this picture was taken, but obviously it was taken looking back at things out in space, which you and I can't see. But here, because of these pictures, because of all that money that NASA spent, tonight we can have a bit of a look at what is further out looking back in. It's interesting also that God, in his creation, he mentioned that various things were good and good and good. And then in verse 31, he decides that now they're very good. An interesting little point there. The next one here is that we can see, it's a quote by the astronaut John Glenn, and he was the first American to orbit the Earth. And he says, to look out at this kind of creation, out here and not believe in God to me is impossible. It just strengthens my faith. I wish there were words to describe what it's like. In 1998, John Glenn he was at 77 years old, and he actually got to fly back in space again with 6 other astronauts, and he's the oldest man that's to ever have flown in space. Another little comment that he had made at some time is there's still no cure for the common birthday. I doubt that he was worried that whether he was going to get birthday presents or not. I'm sure it's more related to how old he might have been going to get. We go here, and here's a quote from an astronaut, John James Irwin, and it says, "The Earth reminded us of a Christmas tree ornament hanging in the blackness of space. Seeing this has to change a man, has to make a man appreciate the creation of God and the love of God." And also he went on further to say, as we got farther and farther away, it diminished in size. Finally, it shrank to the size of a marble, the most beautiful marble you can imagine. That beautiful, warm, living object looks so fragile, so delicate, that if you touched it with a finger, it will crumble and fall apart. He also stated later that Jesus walking on the earth is more important than man walking on the moon. And he was one of those that had walked on the moon, different to what we've never had that experience. So here's someone totally different again. We have a couple of other quotes here. This one here was for a guy called Edgar Mitchell in Apollo 14. And he says, "My view of our planet was a glimpse of divinity." Another guy called Charles Duke, an astronaut, it says, "My walk on the moon lasted 3 days. My walk with God will last forever." Now, we all know in reality that not all astronauts and not all scientists and not all of these people believe in that there's a God. And I think that comes back to what they see and really what their vision is. And I think we need to recognise that astronauts are incredibly intelligent people. To go to space, you have to be really in that top level of intelligence and training and the things that you have to do to get there. And so if you're on the launch side or if you're in the manufacturing of any of those things, you have to be an incredibly clever person. And I'm not here today to try to ridicule any of those people or what their thought or what their achievements are. We are surrounded by not only the space program, but there's people in medical, there's all sorts of things around us that we reap the benefits from, that we can see the great skills and all of these things that have taken place, and we can take advantage of them. In Job 38, just looking here, and we're probably familiar with most of these, the book of Job, it really challenges us all in these verses, including the science world. It doesn't only challenge us, but it really challenges the science world to say, well, did you know about this? Because this was written 1520 BC. This was written a long time ago, and there's a lot of wisdom in here. So are you chasing that wisdom for the glory of God, or are you chasing the wisdom for your own glory? In verse 1 it says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is he that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof? If thou knowest, or who hath stretched the line upon it?" Now Job was a man, just to sort of briefly on that story, he was a good and upright man who had been mightily blessed by the God and being a faithful servant. And we read in this book how he finds himself challenged with sickness and his wealth disappears, and this makes him very despondent and questioning the reason for his own existence and why God has let him down. And I think that that's really where we find here that God is is challenging Job and really saying to him, well, who are you to really question me? And that's what God said to Job back then, but he says it to us today, and he's saying it to the scientific world as well. If we go into the next one, it says, "Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place? Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest all. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail? Who hath divided a watercourse for overflowing of waters, or a way for the lighting of thunder? Hath the rain a father, or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, which is a star, or loose the bands of Orion? Knowest now the audiences of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth?" And really the Lord here in these verses has highlighted many aspects of his creation that we all need to stand up and take notice. I lived in my own little world, and it was a pretty beautiful world. If you've been to the Piccadilly Valley or you go there, it's a pretty beautiful place. And I didn't really take a lot of notice of it. But really surrounded me all my life, all your lives, we are surrounded by the beauty of God that we don't really understand. He is telling us here that we don't really have to understand something to appreciate it or partake of it. And what I'm really meaning from that is that, just to give you an example, the mobile phone, virtually we all have it. It's a classic example. We all have a mobile phone. We all use it. We can't be without it, but none of us understand all the features that are on it. I'd say that no one understands all the features that are on it, or how it was built, what technology it was used to manufacture it or enable its performance. We don't understand, some of us might have some idea of how Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all of these other things work and how all these apps, how they work. You may be able to make an app and put on there, but you don't understand everything about that. But that doesn't mean that you can't take enjoyment, fulfilment, that it doesn't improve your life in some way or another. And the science world, I think, needs to recognise that those things out there are the glory of God. And we need to recognise that we can't be trapped by someone trying to say to us, well, what do you know about space? And what do you know about this? And what do you know about that? Because really that's just totally irrelevant. The greatest scientist, the smartest brain, he may know how to do that, but really can he mow his lawn? Half the time he probably can't mow his lawn, he's got to pay someone else to do it. Can he fix his car? Can he do jobs around the house? There's all sorts of things. Everybody's got their specialty, but we can all take pleasure. We can all see the things. We don't have to understand something to actually reap the benefits of it. The mobile phone here is really only a minuscule achievement compared to the things of God. There's a man, this is a Russian cosmonaut, we've got to call him, and he says the earth was small, light blue, and so touchingly alone, our home that must be defended like a holy relic. The earth was absolutely round. I believe I never saw what the word round meant until I saw the earth from space. Now this man was the first man or first human to walk in space in 1965. He was in space for, I think he walked in space for 12 minutes and 9 seconds. And the thing that he noticed, and one assumes that he would be an atheistic type person, is that he noticed how incredible round that was. He probably never realised that on Isaiah 40, that Isaiah wrote, which was about 760 BC, so probably 2,700 or so years before him, it is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out to the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in, that bringeth the princes to nothing. He maketh the judges of the earth as vanity. The wisdom of this world is nothing compared to that of the Creator. God already knew it was round, had already spoken about it before this man had gone into orbit. You know, we could have looked at lots of things here tonight. There's many, many aspects, and they're just all continual stories in themselves, or things that we can investigate. We could have looked at Alexander the Great and the city of Tyre, and how that he was mentioned before the city of Tyre was conquered. We could have talked about the Great Pyramid and how there's verses that seem to relate to that in the Bible and other ways, and the incredible thing of how that's situated, and the north, south, east, west, and many, many aspects of that. We could have looked at numbers in the Bible and what they may represent, or meanings that they may have. We could have looked at the story of Noah and its relevance to us. And we, of course, we have the play that depicts of that, a lot of what the old times and how those same times are represented here today in the world that we're in. And we could have looked at the human body and just the many, many, many aspects of the human body. In fact, I sort of thought recently, I don't know whether you've ever packed house or you're packing a suitcase or something to go away, and how hard it is to get all those things you want to take into that little box, into that suitcase. Pastor Chris and Christine might have just had that trouble. You know, he's allowed 23 kilos, but they got 27, and how they pack it in there. When you think about the human body, whether you are short or tall, whether you're slim or bigger, it doesn't matter how it is, all the organs, all the things are still neatly packed inside your body. They've all got the same place that they fit. Our eyes are in the same place. Everything is just squeezed into that. And what an incredible thing that is just in itself. I mean, I'm a pretty dumb bloke, but I can just see that that's an incredible thing. I don't understand anything about it. If I'm sick, I'm going to pray about it or go to the doctor. If I cut myself, I know it's going to bleed and it'll probably stop. But I don't need to know a lot about all the human body to know that it's just an incredible thing that didn't just come out of nowhere, and it didn't just come by accident. It was planned. Space is just one thing that we've looked at here that's really of God's divine creation. And, we're just so fortunate that really we come and we have our eyes open. We also could have looked at verses to do with the last days, and I'll just read this one, and this is not straight out of that Bible, but it's in 2 Timothy 3, and it says, "People will be without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, lack self-control, fierce, despisers of those things that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, or conceited, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, and having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof." And it tells us that we turn away. Now, we've heard these verses, like quite a few of these in the last couple of weeks here, but they're worth reminding ourselves, because I think that we do become a bit complacent of the world that we live in. And over the years, things happen and you just sort of become more accepting, because otherwise it would drive you round the bend. You would have trouble coping with it. But we need to be very, very aware of those changes. I read... going back a couple of months ago, there was this guy, and he was a Canadian professor. His name was Charles Taylor, and he had this book called A Secular Age. I think that's what... he had a book. In his book, A Secular Age, warned that modern civilization cannot but bring about a death of God. And you sort of think, well, what an insulting thing to say. And then he goes on and he says, "We have seen the rise of an exclusive humanism. We have swapped God," he wrote, "for a culture of authenticity or expressive individualism, in which people are encouraged to find their own way, discover their own fulfilment, and do their own thing." These verses really go together. And, we can see it, but also what we can see, it's not working. It's pretty obvious that as these people do their own things and they don't want anybody to tell anything, tell them that they're doing wrong or it's not right, we can see that it doesn't work. And you think, goodness me, if you're clever enough to write a book, surely you can see what's going on in the world round about us. Because today we see it in politics, we see it in finances, and people can't get houses, and people are dependent on all sorts of different things, and you've got family breakdowns, and you've got wars, and that just goes on and on and on. That's right under our nose, that we see it all the time. We might even encounter it in our own lives. And then here we are, we get a statement like this. I think it's very important that we need to keep in mind that unbelief, like this man, doesn't void, stop, or disprove belief. All it is the things that they see, the things that they got to look at, aren't the same things as us. Those things are really their man-driven ideas and things, and they don't work. And we're in a mess because they don't work. But we have the belief in God, and we have the personal experience that doesn't leave us. For we have received the power of the Holy Ghost in our lives, that same Spirit that spoke this world into existence, that raised Jesus Christ from the dead. That's the power. That's where we know we want to be. Other things we could have looked at is Matthew 24, Ezekiel 38, which we can just see here, and quite incredible things that are taking place. Gee, time's really getting away from me here, so I'll just go to this next slide here, and this is actually the Pleiades. Pleiades is 440 light years away from us, which is a fairly long thing. If you had an electric car, you got no show getting there, I can tell you. It says, "Let no man deceive you. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and again the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, and they are vain." I won't be able to go there, but I was going to look at John chapter 3, and we just got the verses here. But Nicodemus says to Jesus, "How can these things be?" And so Jesus has spoken to him about the wind bloweth where it listeth, and they hear the sound thereof, and they canst not tell where it come from. And really that's talking about that the Spirit bloweth where it wills, and you hear the noise, but you don't know where it come from. This world that we live in is here and it exists, and all the things around it, we know that it exists, we see it, we look at it, but we don't know where it comes from. Very much a bit of a parallel to what we're talking about here tonight. And Jesus said, "How can these things be?" And in a way, that's sort of what the world is looking at. You tell me this about having a walk with the Lord, but how can that be true? I don't believe that it's true. How can it be true? And in a way, I don't say that Nicodemus was argumentative here, but really he listened to those things of Jesus. But he was really questioning it. Well, it doesn't make sense to me. And we've all had conversations like that. He was inquisitive, but he didn't necessarily want to respond. If we think about the other verse I have, which we'll just have a quick look at, is in Matthew chapter 11. And we'll just go back here, Matthew chapter 11. And in verse 3 it says here, "And he said unto him, Art thou that he should come, or do I look for another?" Now this was the words of John the Baptist. So John, who had baptised Jesus and had obviously been very aware of him around on the earth, and he was in prison at this time, and he's saying to these people, well, is this really the Messiah? Is this the man, or do I go and look for someone else? And that's really the world we're in too, looking at different religions and different things to satisfy and not being satisfied. They perhaps are asking a similar question. But Jesus answered and said unto them, "Go and show John again those things which you do see and hear. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached unto him." You go and tell John all of those things that you've seen, and that's proof in itself. You go and tell this world to look out and be aware of their environment and the things and the stars above, and that's proof in itself. And today we could go and say to people who question us, we could say, people's lives are being changed, are being healed, body, mind and soul, are being delivered from burdens and woes. This is talking about you and talking about me. We could go and tell other people this. They are being set free by the waters of baptism and the infilling of the Holy Spirit. They now can see and they can hear and they have a vision. And every one of us sitting here, we have a story that we can tell unto other people, just as the same as when they come and ask Jesus. He said, you go and tell John this, and we can go and tell people all of these things that are taking place as well. My final slide. God's wonders are clearly seen. There's the marvels in the sky, there's the marvels in the sea, in mankind, animals and vegetation, in the prophecies of the current world events, in the proof in the earth, in the minerals and the things in the earth, and the Lord's governing the universe. Mathematics that all the scientists use really is only the laws and principles that God set up to start with. And in people's lives as they are turned around and healed. We don't need to understand all the rest of the stuff. We don't really need to understand the depths of the sea. David may, but we don't have to. We don't have to be an astronomer. We don't have to be a doctor or a great person in those things. We don't have to be an historian. We don't have to be the great mathematician. But we do know in our own lives the things that God has done. I'll just finish off in Proverbs 25. It says, it's the glory of God to conceal a thing, but it's the honour of kings is to search out a matter. We can all have visions in different ways. Vision, the ability to see. But what do we want our vision to be? Do we want to be able to see the things of God? Or do we want to be able to see the things of wealth? Or do we want to be able to see all sorts of other things that will take our vision away from the things of God? We want our vision to be clearly on the things of God. And all the people said.
That was extremely good, don't you think? It's nice that we don't need to understand everything, because just marvelling at the wonders of creation can take us back to marvelling about the Creator and just everything that's around us. It's pretty inspiring. So on that note of amazement and wonder and appreciation, we're going to have just a little bit of prayer. And for those who feel that they can actually get down on their knees and then up again off their knees, we're just going to encourage each of us to do that. Just maybe it helps us concentrate a little bit better when we're praying. But for now, if you can do that, however you do it, let's have a little bit of prayer, and I'll interrupt you shortly.